Welcome everybody to Don't Get Rusty. Aiming, AIM, to decode the Al-FAA-bet soup. So this is kind of a different one for us because now we're talking about books with no third-party guest. However, welcome
these
to
are owned by all of us, Pablo. These are owned by us all.
That's true. That's true. So Thursday, September 15th, 2022. Welcome. As always, we're generously brought to you by Jeppson, ForeFlight, and Boeing, and they continue to support us, so we support them, and we really appreciate it. So, brought to you by. So, some of the stuff we have here, we always review the actual, if we ask questions or we have giveaways or something like that. So, there's a control panel. So, on the right side, there it is. On the right side, this is the new version. You will see certain buttons, thank you. And the one that's highlighted right there and in the gray box is where you ask your questions. And the reason we tell you this is because some people don't find it or they think they put it in there and they didn't. So that's where you go there, and that's on the laptop. On the left side, you'll see if you're on a mobile device, such as a tablet, maybe an iPad in this case, there's a question mark at the top between that person and the camera, and that's where you would ask your questions.
Oops, sorry.
So, a little introduction. I am.
There we go.
I am Pablo Maurelia, Senior Director of Flight Training Technology. Little flag for you. Pilot, tech guy, animal lover, and hockey player now from Colorado. And part of the AFTA, creating the AFTA app and all of its wonderfulness. And also just part of a co-host here. Love being with you guys. Chris?
We love you, Pablo.
I'm
Chris Moser, Senior Director of Flight Training Education at AOPA, and I am a CFI, and I work with flight schools, and check out, by the way, can I make a plug, Pablo?
Oh, there's more?
Right.
There's more.
Go
ahead.
This month and next month, we are running our Flight Training Experience Survey and Award. So if you have done any training with a school or a CFI, please go to aopa.org/FT survey and fill out a survey on their behalf, because you can help them get recognized, or you can tell us if they need some help themselves. Just let us know. But yeah, fill out the survey if you would. I'd love to have you participate. So that's it.
It is a wonderful opportunity being part of it, periphery wise. All right, and lastly, of course, this week or this month is Stephen. Say hello, Stephen.
Hello, Stephen.
Tell us, come on, give us.
I work in the background as a coordinator with the Flight Training Initiative, so I do all the things these guys do, at least try to help them do them. So working AFTA, working survey, producing these shows. It's a good time.
Yeah, Stephen, by the way, is running the survey this year, doing an awesome job. So yes,
please fill them out.
Perfect.
Please fill them out.
Cool. All right, so it's been 2 months. Let's see, right? Almost 2 months since Oshkosh. And we've only done one of these though since, because we had done ours right before Oshkosh, the one previous to that. So I did forget to put this in last month's slides, but I wanted to point out, because it was so much fun last time we mentioned Oshkosh, but a lot of you were fantastic, and I loved every minute of it. They came up to me and said hello, and then I said, that's Chris, in case you didn't see him. And so they would talk to us, and but this guy in particular here, Robin, fantastic, came by, talked to us a lot. It was great. Took some pictures. You can see there. That's just one of the many. We had a really good time. So I know I appreciate it, and it's really great to see you guys. So I just wanted to thank you, and maybe you'll get on these slides as well if we meet you and talk to you.
Yeah, so what we didn't mention was, Robin, I did slip you that 20 to make sure that you took a picture with Pablo, so appreciate that.
It was important. It helps feed the ego. All right, a couple of reminders where you can find us, some of the things about us. One, you do get Wings credit for this. Note, only if you're viewing this live, so don't go watch this later. Well, if you're here, you'd hear me say this. If you're watching this in the future and it's not Thursday, September 15th, you don't get credit for this. How about that? That's clear.
Dang.
All right, and this is being recorded. Now, it does take a little bit, maybe call it 24 hours, maybe, sometimes a little longer, but that's roughly average to get up on these devices. And right now we are on YouTube live channel in playlists, and that's where the recording goes. And I believe, am I correct, Stephen, that this is going to YouTube as well now?
Correct. Yes, it goes under the AOPA live channel, and we have our own playlist that has all the episodes available.
Are we live now as well?
We are live today. They should be broadcasting out to Facebook. I don't know if the YouTube link was cooperating.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Now there's no recording. Well, there probably will be a recording, but we don't do that. So you can go watch this anytime after that. So if you missed something here, go back and watch. And then as you can see here, the last one is webinars.aop.org, and that's where you can find all of the AOPA webinars, but more importantly, your favorite, Don't Get Rusty, will be on there as well. All right, so let's do a couple of house cleanings here for what we've been doing here. Little did we mention, so this is cool. Please go look at it. It's September 15th of 91, the first flight of a C-17.
Is that a real picture? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think so. They all look the same. It's photoshopped. It looks photoshopped. Anyway, okay, cool plane. We saw an Oshkosh, then we saw a Globemaster as well, didn't we? I'm sorry, a Galaxy C5 out there as well. So it was very cool to see. Yeah, all right, and before we begin, of course,
that may have been an Air Force propaganda photo, or
yeah,
we love our plane type of thing.
That's right. All right, so as always, before we begin the actual stuff here, let's do a poll.
Roll the poll.
Let's do it. So, prepping for my Checkride flight review, it's best to read. Chris, I don't know about you, but I've read all of these, front to back, page to page. How do you find these?
Many times. Seemed like a lot of times you were napping, though. Just saying, but
I was still flipping pages.
Osmosis, right?
Listen, if it was anything like what I just had done, and I was under, they're telling me funny stories of how I was. I didn't get anything out of it while I was asleep, but I enjoyed it.
So Pablo, don't look at the results. What do you predict? Because I am seeing the results, and it's my own fault. What do you predict people are going to say here? What's the most important one?
Usually they're all over the place, but prepping for Checkride flight review, I would say they're going to say the FAA.
Think the FAA will be it? Okay.
That's I think the one that everyone knows about, and so that's why we're doing this show.
The FAA is good reading too. Just saying.
Yeah, the little rice paper 1,000-page book that's this big. Yeah. All right, we're at 67, 68. If you get to 70 to 75, we usually stop. So hurry up and get your last 4%, 3%,
Get in there.
2%. 1%, there it is.
Training, my instructor gave me the FAA and a bunch of other books and said, here, read this. And I was like, what the heck? I know, right? No.
All right, so here's some results. We got 75% of the crew in. Airplane, the FAR aim. Okay, beautiful. So that's what we thought. Now, however, it's funny.
There's always the 4%ers down there. There's nothing as long as
there are, but it's funny because really YouTube is the primary source at this point for a lot of people, and then they just check with the FAR aim for the real. You know what I mean? So fantastic. All right, so let's begin, guys.
All right.
Why are we here today, Chris?
Why are we here? Well, this is actually was Pablo's idea because he was thinking this, and so we kicked this around for a bit. And so basically, that we're going to talk about today are just kind of our practical guide. I assume practical, we'll call it that, guide to FAA materials. And the big thing was, as many of you likely know, and maybe you don't know, the FAA has a lot of materials. They put out a lot of stuff for us to use. So we picked out the kind of the big hitters in a sense, or the major categories, and we're going to talk a little bit about those and maybe some tips on how you can use them. So as you can see, we're going to talk about the FAR aim, aviation handbooks and manuals. That's kind of together. And by the way, there is a handout. So check out the handout because we have links to pretty much all of this. I don't have a link on the FAR aim, but you can easily Google that. But I did give some links to some of the stuff I'm going to talk about. And then advisory circulars, the ACS or Airman Certification Standards, and the PTS, depending on which certificate you're looking at, FAA Safety Magazine, and FAST Team. So we're going to talk about all that stuff and just go in a little bit more detail about what's in them, what might be practical, maybe how you could use them. So hopefully it'll be fun. We should we'll see what we can come up with here. Ready, Pablo? He's back.
Sorry, everybody. Yeah, sorry, everybody.
All right. So the first one, let's talk about the FAR aim. And so, sometimes people ask, well, what's the difference between them? Like, because they always come in that same book, yet they are two different things, two different entities.
What's the difference, Chris?
What is the difference? So the difference between them is that you have the FARs, or the Federal Aviation Regulations. And really, the FAA has been trying to encourage us to say 14 CFR part whatever, because there is another FAR. It's like the Federal Acquisition Regulations. So there's another one that's also abbreviated FARs. But it's the Federal Aviation Regulations, or 14 CFR. And these are the rules. This is the law that we have to follow. It's literally like these are the laws, the legal regulations that we must follow as pilots. Whereas the AIM is more about how the FAA explains to us, and one of the publications, one of them that does this, explains to us how they want us to follow those, so like the procedures we should follow. So one is by law, you got to do it. The other one is sort of like, this is the recommendation explaining, this is how we want you to comply with those things, with procedures.
And you'll also see in some of these slides, I think we left it in there, it will say something, all of the supplemental ones here, including the AIM, do revert back to FAR saying that whatever's in there does not supersede any regulation by the blah, 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 blah. So, but you know, as always, they make it ambiguous at times.
So in other words, and I want to reiterate that point, because you're exactly right, Pablo, that if you see something in like the pilot's handbook or in the AIM and it contradicts the regulation is what wins always. So you cannot.
So really the important thing, and this is probably going to be the summary, but the important thing is when you're reading these, go back to the one that, you know, the table of commandments. Well, yeah, the table of commandments, the FARs, right? So like, and this is one we always talk about, at least I do, is the straight in arrival and on tower.
That's coming up. We're going to talk about that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So, and those are the kind of things where if you read something in the pilot's handbook or something that we'll be covering shortly, and you're like, oh, okay, that's cool. Just make sure that, you know, if it sounds like something you haven't heard, that there is no regulation for that, or if there is, follow that.
Yeah, follow the regs if they're there. All right.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to point out here is we already did a episode on just interesting regs or regs that we thought would be fun. So instead of talking about a specific reg here, instead what I wanted to do is I wanted to point out 2 places that you can find out more about the regs, and then also I wanted to talk about how you can a way to sort of maximize the FAR AIM itself. So number 1. Have you ever wondered where a reg came from? Like, why did they do that? What's this rule? And in fact, when I've been instructing, I've said to people, when you look at these regs, remember that typically those are there because somebody did something, right? And so they made a rule. It's like because when it first began, there weren't a lot of rules. And then as people did dumb things, they said, okay, now we're gonna have a rule that says you can't do that anymore. So if you want to find out more, check out the Federal Register. And I have a link to an example of what I'm talking about in the handout. So I've got a link to the Federal Register, and this is a thing that comes out with all laws, but it will literally tell you if you look up a particular reg, like Federal Register, and look up like 61. I think I did 61. I don't know if I can tell from here. I have to click on it. Let's see if it'll not give me a bunch of trouble. Oh. I forget the exact reg number, but you can look up the reg number or the topic, search for it in the Federal Register by that, and then you will see when that reg was created. It'll give you a little overview of this is what this reg is meant to do. It'll talk about the background of why they were doing it. And a lot of times you'll even see the comments that people gave or a summary of those comments that people gave when they were going through the rulemaking process. So the one I have there is about aviation training devices. And this was a reg change that allowed aviation training devices to be used by pilot schools and others. It's like the one now where to keep instrument proficiency, for instance, we used to have a CFII in the sim with you, and you don't anymore. They changed that rule, and so that you can see that. So we'll talk about where that came from. So if you ever want to know why, check out the Federal Register. You can look these up, and you can get these answers as to why. And if you're looking for help, I will throw out there, of course, what number should they call, Pablo, if they're looking for help in finding some of this stuff?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
1-800-USA AOPA. You should know. So the Pilot Information Center. So they deal with this stuff all the time. And in fact, a lot of times people have questions and they will send you like, hey, check out, here's the Federal Register. Or the other place you can find some really interesting information, or you're trying to figure out what does this rule mean? What does this reg mean? The FAA Letters of Interpretation, we call them LOI, or Letter of Interpretation. This is one where people will write to the FAA's Office of Legal, I think it's Office of Legal Counsel. Don't hold me to that exact thing, but it's basically the legal office for the FAA, and you can ask them about, you know, whatever, like, what does this reg mean? I don't understand, or how do I comply with this? They will write back with an opinion that takes on basically legal weight, that this is the way the FAA is going to interpret this, and this is what they want you to do. I do want to warn people, please do not just willy-nilly go asking them questions. It's cool to go look at the letters and see what they've already written, but one thing I know that you can kind of take as a guide is if you ask them a question, they may come back with an answer we don't like, and now that affects all of us. So just be careful about asking questions unless you know what the answer might be. And that's why AOPA will often will do that, but we'll work with the FAA so we kind of know what's going on.
So real quick, Chris, we're getting a lot of people asking about where the handout is, and there's links and stuff. So a couple things just to cover to get everyone that's already on here that maybe didn't hear it or won't be here at the end. We do have a slide that has a link to all of the manuals, and yes, there are PDFs for free. You don't have to buy anything for all of this stuff. But secondly is there is a handout, and on the right side, when I covered it earlier, the little bar, that's where you'll see handouts. So there'll be a link, not a link, but there'll be a little icon there if you're on your laptop or on your computer, your PC, and that's where you'd find the handout. And
I'm looking at see the title of it is it's a PDF file, and it's 2022-09, obviously September of 2022, and this is DGR, don't get rusty, FAA Handbooks and Pubs handout. So I've got links to this. I've got links to where you can go to the letters of interpretation too. You can search there as well for just topics. So this is actually kind of fascinating. I like that stuff to go look and see what's going on. There was one, I pulled up an example, I think I've got it in the handout, I believe, about preventive maintenance. And so there was a question the guy asked about in the preventive maintenance, it's in part 43, appendix A, preventive maintenance. There's a list of things that we're allowed to do. And this person was either operating a jet or whatever. And they asked, can a pilot check the air pressure on a jet? Because the jet tires have like really high air pressure. Like our planes, like a Cessna, it's between 30 and 60 PSI. It's like almost like the same pressure as a bike tire. But the jets are like over 200 and 200 PSI. And so they were asking, can they do that? Because it's I guess something about it wasn't specifically listed in that list or whatever. And the FAA came back and said in this letter of interpretation that just because something is not listed in Appendix 43 Part A, that list, doesn't mean you can't do it. It just needs to fit the criteria of something based. And don't quote me on this. You need to go look at that letter. But it's along the lines of just as long as it's a relatively simple thing. So for example, in that list, you can change landing lights, but somebody was asking, well, what about a post light, right? And so according to this interpretation, you probably could go and change little light bulbs in the airplane under Appendix 43 Part A because it fits that criteria of it's like relatively simple assembly, et cetera, et cetera. And again, look at that letter to get more about it. It's an AOPA article actually that links to the letter. So kind of cool stuff, I think. Admittedly,
very cool.
I'm an aviation nerd too, so it's all good.
There you go again, covering that for me. That was my line.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying again, good offense is the best defense. So the Aeronautical Information Manual, by the way, the name has changed. This used to be the Airman Information Manual, but they've changed it to Aeronautical recently, or sometime recently in the past year or two or whatever. But this is like we said already, this is just more about general stuff about how you comply or how you would operate. I don't know, there's a whole lot we want to get into details there. But the thing that I wanted to point out was if you were looking for a way, you may be familiar with this, but if you're looking for a way, like how do I read the regs or how do I read the AIM? Because they're big, there's a lot of stuff in there. If you go, Jeppesen has this in theirs and ASA has it in their FAR AIM as well, even electronic versions, I've seen this. They will have a guide that will list all the regs based on your certificate. So if you're either working towards getting your private or you already have your private or you're trying to get your commercial, whatever it might be, it has a list of the regs they recommend. So that's a good way to start so that way you're not having to read all of them because that's a lot of stuff in those regs. So, all right, let's move on.
And I would also say that in this case, just like 4%ers, the YouTube, there are some sample Checkrides out there. There's some sample, heck, there's everything, sample everything, and real ones. People actually, their DP agreed to have them filmed while they did their Checkride. And so that's a good idea, just to get an idea of maybe how one person does it. But because they're not going to ask you, 1,000 pages of stuff. I mean, it's what you're a private pilot, right? So they're going to ask you a certain subset. But it's good to see those in action, how they're answered and responded to.
Cool. Continue. Okay. The next section we want to talk about, we're going to talk about, there's a ton of stuff in here, the FAA Handbooks and Manuals. There is a link to the page where all these are found, free PDFs in the handout itself. And I know that the link for this particular section comes at the end of this, but we wanted to talk a little bit about all these different manuals. And so here's just a sampling. We're going to go through each one. Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide, Risk Management, Weight and Balance, Aviation Instructor's Handbook. There's tons of stuff. and then categories even within this. Let's take a look at the first one, and more, by the way, I forgot to say. The FAA handbooks, on the ground side of things, quote unquote, we've got things like the pilot's handbook. And so what's the point of this? Of course, the pilot's handbook is basically, as you can see right here, basic knowledge essential for training. And it's both for private and commercial, even some of the stuff you could use during your instrument training as well. And it kind of covers a general overview of all the knowledge areas that you would need. And notice the note we found in the pilot's handbook, though, except for the regulations. They do mention them sometimes, but the regs obviously always defer. And here's that. You want to talk about that note you found, Pablo, about the regs and the PHAC?
Yeah, so it's just interesting to me that every one of these manuals literally had the same thing. It was a cut and paste, but it was a lot of these books will say must or should or things like that. Those aren't intended to be misunderstood, I guess, as the way to do something. There's still a regulation in that probably. It's more of a desired action. It's so funny, Chris and I was trying to come up with, shoulds, recommended, like what's the word, right? So in this case, they're just saying it's a desired action, which is one we didn't come up with. So well done, FAA. And so what they deem critical. So it's I guess you could call it almost like a safety issue for most of this, right? It's just kind of here's how to be the safest. So anyway, so the such language is not intended to add, interpret, or relieve a duty, as we've mentioned 30 times already. Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations.
And one of the things I'll mention here too with the pilot's handbook is that at the end I've got a tip that you could potentially use to figure out like, well, where might I want to refer to some of these? And the pilot's handbook's got stuff in it like aerodynamics and weather, overview of weather, airspace, like air traffic control systems, all kinds of system stuff for generic airplanes. So you check it out. In fact, it's got airplanes and I believe it's got helicopters and stuff in it too. So it's got all kinds of different things. It's quite comprehensive and a good overview. Something similar that you might find, for example, in Rod Machado's private pilot handbook, I might mention too.
I've heard of that.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So the other one, another one we wanted to mention here that is a good one is the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide. This is like take the legend on a sectional or a TAC and blow it up by 100. It's insane how much detail. Yeah. If you ever wondered what is that symbol on the chart, this has more. In fact, most of the time it's got stuff on it that I've never seen on a chart. So it's stuff that could be on a chart or I'm sure is on a chart somewhere.
Go
ahead.
The reason this page here was added, that you can see it's smaller, but it was meant just as an example. Maybe I don't know if you could blow it up, Chris, but the reason that was put on there is because not only does it tell you what it is, but it tells you, for lack of a better term, how it became, in the sense of what the number means. In this case, you look at your MEF there, right? The 2 with the little 8, it's on the map there on your right.
Yep.
And you'll see that this is how they got it. And it tells you exactly why it's 2,800. You start at 2649 for your MSL above, or the obstacle top. They put in 100 for a possible error on the obstacle height. That equals 2749, and as we like to say internally, it's the basic math. Add another 100 to it. It's essentially 2,800, the next highest level, right? The next highest 100. That's how you get your maximum elevation figure. So it's a really ridiculous book, and I didn't even know it existed when I did my training, Chris. And I think it was probably a couple of years later when I saw it. I'm like, oh my gosh! And I put it right on my iPad, right into ForeFlight, which is something that that was mentioned here as well. Is you could actually put all of these on your, or they do allow download by chapter as well, which is interesting, which I think is kind of cool too. And so you don't have to, because they're huge. Don't think you're going to download everything we talk about, including everything else. They're at least 50 to 80 meg each in low definition. So you're going to want to do probably a chapter or a page screenshot, but you can put these all in your, we'll say ForeFlight. They are a sponsor, but you could put it in your EFB, your EFB.
Yes. And it's an amazing source, because I know that recently I was helping out the high school team, and we were talking about the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide, and one of the questions happened to be about railroads, and we looked up the section on railroads in this. It was like, holy cow, I had no idea there were that many. If you see on the chart, like, oh, it's a railroad track, right? No, they literally have symbols for if it's 2 rails or 3, or it's a station and all this other stuff. It's crazy the amount of detail. So yeah, if you haven't checked it out, it's it's kind of fascinating if you like aeronautical charts. So check that one.
And you'll actually learn something, even if especially if you're a longtime pilot, because they've added some things.
Oh yeah,
there,
they do. They make. In fact, they've had those meetings here at AOPA. I've been here when they've been talking about new symbols that they're going to add on, like that little rocket symbol a couple of years back, which was for rocket launches. It's crazy, and the little like the magenta diamond. Okay.
Yeah.
The next one in the ground section is the risk management handbook. It's kind of, this is a deep dive into literally what the title is, risk management. So if you want to go deeper into, because it's like some of the stuff is in the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge, but here they really break it down. And it's not a super thick book, but they've got much more detail about aeronautical decision making. That's weird how that broke. Automation management, risk mitigation. It's literally what the title says. So if you're interested in that, you want to learn more about human factors and everything else, this is the book you want to check out. And again,
hey, Chris,
available free as a PDF.
And this one is small, like I said, but and I didn't know this one existed either until I met you.
I have a copy.
And I know you do. and you were saying, and I hadn't seen this because my school didn't do it, that some schools require you to for a student to do this before they fly. And what I mean by require would be, what was the FAA's term? Is to require it before flight that they do it, not like part of the training, but so much so that they get used to doing it beforehand. So it's more of a desired action that's deemed critical for some schools. Correct? You've seen this?
Like a risk.
The matrix?
Yeah, the matrix thing that's in there. Yep.
Yeah. So
some sort of analysis of risk before the flight. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then that exists too, but how did you've used it, or I don't remember. Can you tell me about that?
We had we had a thing. Well, we did at my school, and schools will do various iterations of this, but basically there was one we found, the Civil Air Patrol one that goes through the conditions of the flight. I remember showing you that one. And then also there's one that we used to use, which is basically just calculations of performance, and then you look at the weather, and then based on that decide, is it safe? So we had an actual formal method for doing that. And the risk management handbook has something in there the FAA uses as well. And AOPA used to have one too. I don't think we've got it anymore. I think they were talking about redoing it, but we had one as well that would go through that risk management stuff. So it's cool. So if you like risk management, and I went into deep dive in this too, because I did it as part of my graduate work. I read some of this stuff and used it.
And I would say it's boring, but it's an easy read because it's short. And it's not a front to back. It's not a back to front cover thing either. You're front to back. You don't.
You go in and find out what you need. You go in and find out what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is definitely a good one to have, especially I think for schools and CFIs, like I said. So check it out.
Yep, risk management. If you haven't seen it, check it out. There's good stuff in it, and it really does go into depth. I used it for one of my human factors classes, and then we used that book. So, all right, the weight and balance handbook. Well, it's like you would think, weight and balance. Why would you need a whole book on this? It's already in the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge.
Well, Chris, let me answer that question since you asked it. Why do you need a Don't Get Rusty on weight and balance? That was fantastic and a lot better than most people thought. Please go check it out in our history list. But no, you're right. This is one of those you're like, I mean, this is funny. This is one of those where you say, I have a spreadsheet that fills everything in for me. Not what we're talking about. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, what's cool about this one is that it goes, obviously it does show the basics of weight and balance. It'll go through the basic calculations that we would learn for a Cessna or whatever, but the weight and balance handbook goes in more depth and it gets into bigger airplanes. So if you're flying other airplanes or helicopters, whatever, it's in there. So it's pretty interesting if you're flying something or you want to see how they do it with the airline. This shows you that. And it even talks about if you're an AMP or if you always wondered how do the AMPs weigh an airplane, it shows you that part in here too. It explains how to calculate the actual, when they weigh the actual individual airplane, get its weight and figure out its balance. They show you how to do that calculation and the procedure for that. So it's like the other one, like the risk management handbook, it is in depth into its title. It just goes farther than the other stuff is.
And much unlike the risk management handbook, you wouldn't believe this, it is really boring. So really, you're going in there to get your definitions. Please don't try to read this front to back and say, those guys are idiots. Oh,
it's
okay, moving on. Moving on.
Next. Okay. So this is one that I put on the list because, and by the way, which we're going to say on the next slide. There are more than this. There are more than what we're talking about. Go look at the link that's on the handout, or just Google FAA Handbooks and Manuals.
Yeah.
But the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, this is one that's for use what's called the Fundamentals of Instruction for flight instructors. And what I can tell you is, like I said, I was a teacher for a long time, and when I went to college, I did 4 years of education as part of all that education training. This handbook takes that and summarizes it down. So it's a lot of learning theory. It talks techniques for instructors to use and to help them get ready to become a CFI or a ground instructor. That said, why would the regular pilot that's not going to be a CFI be interested in this? And the only thing I was just thinking about here was it might be useful for you to if you're ever wondering, like, well, how do I learn or learn more about that learning theory? Or maybe you're having a hard time, you're getting frustrated, you're like, man, I'm getting like stuck on this thing and I can't seem to get past it, or like I go for a while and then all of a sudden I make progress. Well, that's called a learning plateau, and that's in there. So it might be useful for you just to know that other people go through a lot of the same stuff. It's how we learn. And by knowing how we learn, a lot of times it can help you learn better. You can understand the process you're going through in more of, I'm going to use an education term here, Pablo, in a metacognitive way. You can kind of back off and see how you're operating, and it potentially can help you learn better. So I just thought that might be something you might want to peruse. Yeah, this is not one that I would read the whole thing if you're not going for your CFI, but.
Great term, Chris, and you've taught me something today. I appreciate it. You've been a litany of help with the Penelopes of all of your terms this week. This is an inside joke for us. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. This guy's killing me all week.
The vocab time. It's vocab week. Plus, my son's gotten into high school. He's doing vocab stuff too. So, all right. Now, let's get past the ground stuff. By the way, there is and more to all this stuff. The FAA handbooks and manuals.
Let me chime into this and more stuff. There is a slide coming up in 2 that has more, and you'll see how much more there is.
Yeah.
These were just selected because they are probably, I don't know, Chris, I would just say probably the average pilot. Like, these are all things that have the information.
We'll call it the greatest hits, is what I was thinking.
Greatest hits. Yeah.
Just the stuff I thought would be applicable to most people. There is more. There's so much more.
There is.
When it comes to in the air, of course, and of course, we're coming from a bias because we are airplane pilots for the Airplane Flying Handbook, and we know a lot of people are. So the Airplane Flying Handbook is the one we put on here, but please understand, one of the coolest ones on here is the Glider Flying Handbook. I'm just going to throw that out there. Only because I also like gliders. But we were blown away because it was actually like, I knew that there was a glider one and like a rotorcraft or helicopter one. But when you go and look at the list of stuff available, there's balloons, the balloon manual, and the sea. What was it? So ski plane, seaplane, and it was something with helicopters with skis and floats, and like anything you can stick a ski or a float on, it talks about how to fly that. Powered parachutes, airships, although that one's a little dated. The airship one came from, was it like 1942?
Yes. Now, it's funny you say that because I think one of the things that makes me laugh is when I do go in there and, you hear about certain regulations and stuff and things being talked about or changed, but there are many books in there that are over 25 years old. And I think Airships is the oldest, right? And that's the one that looks like it's a copy of a copy of a copy.
Yeah.
And then there's also the Navy one.
The Naval Aviator's Guide to Aerodynamics, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was 1965.
That's more recent. That's even direct top.
Brand new, comparatively. All right.
So what I was going to say about these, though, that the difference between the stuff we looked at before with weight and balance and Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, that's all that ground kind of knowledge, stuff that you would need to know to help you do flight planning and, obviously pass the written test. These airplanes / all these other types of flying handbooks, this is literally the maneuvers. They go through and they explain, how do you do a stall? How do you do landings? How do you do, like, for helicopters, what is the thing? What's that thing they do where they fall out of the sky? I'm sure one of our folks, not the crash. I'm just playing right now.
Me too.
What's that rotor thing, though, as they come down?
I
can't remember this. So anyway, it explains all that stuff. For gliders, it shows like how to tow in the wake and all that kind of stuff. Boxing the wake, it's called, and turn, all that sort of emergency procedures. So they're really, really cool. So check these out. If you're looking for those procedures, this is it. I will mention, I'll just throw it out there just because my good friend Rob Machado's got one called How to Fly an Airplane. Great book as well. It's got lots of pictures in it, so that's a good one. So we'll just throw that one out.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I set this next section apart. I put it as in FAA handbooks and manuals in the clouds, because these are a little different. It's the instrument flying handbook and the instrument procedures handbook. And obviously these are used when you're flying instruments. And in fact, I'm sure somebody's going to tell us what that thing was with the helicopters. Something.
It's killing me now. I can't even focus. Sorry.
I know our audience does. Please tell us. Instrument flying handbook. So the instrument flying handbook used to
rotate.
Auto rotate. There it is. Thank you.
And thank you to everybody, by the way. Thank you.
I can't believe we couldn't remember that.
I love you guys. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
So the instrument flying handbook is used to be a standalone in an early iteration. In fact, we were getting the pictures up for this. Pablo found the original. He's like, oh, here, I like this one better. I'm like, Pablo, that's the old one from like the 90s. So we can't use that one. That's the one I had. So the instrument flying handbook, it really is, it used to be a combination of it's like imagine the airplane flying handbook and the pilot's handbook of aeronautical knowledge smushed together. And then they came out with a new edition, and it still is kind of like that. So it's not a clear delineation of like airplane flying handbook versus pilot's handbook, because it talks about how to scan both on six-pack and glass cockpit, but it also does an overview of charts, airspace systems, a lot of the other stuff too. But the FAA added on, not long after the new version of the instrument flying handbook, this instrument procedures handbook. And we were remiss at putting a picture of that up there. And so the instrument procedures handbook is a deep dive into, it doesn't talk about how to scan or anything like that, but it goes deep dive into the IFR system, the charts, approach charts and the route charts and procedures. So these two go together very well. You can kind of start with the instrument flying handbook and then you supplement it with all the stuff that's in the instrument procedures handbook. So deep dive, if you're going for your instrument rating on whatever it would be, airplanes or helicopters or whatever. And in fact, you can do instrument flying on gliders too. There's certain parts where they do that. This is the thing to check out, these books.
Chris, someone just asked, it's got nothing to do with this. Do private pilots, do you need a private pilot license to be a glider pilot? That's Richard.
No, to fly gliders, I guess I want to clarify. But no, you can get your private
glider pilot.
To be a glider pilot. Yeah, you can do it. A sport, there's a glider rating on it, and then you can also do it with a private. You can earn your private in a glider, or if you have your private in airplane and want to go fly gliders, you just do a glider add-on. I actually did that with my commercial certificate. I added it on. So I did it in 5 days down in Florida. If you were just doing a private add-on and you're pretty current, you could probably do it in like 3 days for the private. So it's less flights. We should do a thing about it. I think I talked about that last time. The weirdest thing was I went down, first day glider training, quick story. And I remember we did a bunch of flights, right? And so we did like 12 flights in a day because it's up and down to do the toe and back. And we landed after the 12th one, my instructor's like, so how you feeling? I'm like, I'm getting kind of tired. Like, it's like, you got one more in you? I'm like, okay, sure. He gets out of the glider, just sends me off solo. I was like, oh my. So he kind of got me without me thinking about it. Then that night though, I knew I had to do a bunch of solos the next day. It was like, I was nervous. And then it took me about 5 flights. I'm like, what am I doing? This is insane. I have no engine. But then by the 5th flight, I was like, oh, I get it. I understand this now. If I just get here, here, and here, it's going to be fine. And it was a lot of fun. All right, moving on. Here is your end. So much more, as Pablo said.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the link we were talking about. But I know that a lot of you will say we can't read that, but that wasn't the point. I put this picture in there just so you could see that this is from the FAA's site, Aviation Handbooks and Manuals, and this is all of them that they have. Now, when I say all of them, it's the ones that are available. I think there's some areas where they talk about other things. But in all of these links, I think most of them are actually downloadable. There's a couple that aren't, but they also have versions. And I think that's one of the things I wanted to point out here while we're the best of them. That's right. Attached to all of these, you can imagine, because of the federal stuff, there's errata. So when they find something that's wrong, right, they correct it and they put out something else to correct. Usually it's spelling errors or misspeaking. It's not like a rule, right. But there's different versions. So whatever you do here, don't just Google it, because that's what happened with what Chris was saying. I was like, oh, here it is. That was the old version. And you don't know because it doesn't say, right? I mean, it's a book. So don't just Google it, and don't just Google for PHAC, Pilot's Handbook, blah, blah. There it is. Click it and go. You see every one of these, and you can see kind of in the background there, the -9B. They all have something, FAA-H-8083-1B or whatever. The biggest thing you could do is probably after you find one, Google what is the latest version of Instruments Handbook, Instrument Procedures, whatever, and it'll tell you right away. That Google does work. And it'll be right from the FAA, it'll tell you the latest version is, and you can check what you're downloading or looking at, because that's really important.
And if you go to this page, they do upload this. So this is always the current stuff.
This is always the current. That's what I was saying. First of all, the FAA one almost never comes up as one of the top two when you Google Pilot's Handbook. It'll be all of the third-party people that have it and put their logo on it.
Yeah.
So remember, they're free as well. You don't have to buy them from one of the vendors.
Yeah. Although they're not terribly expensive to get the print. Some people like the paper, but you can get the PDF for free. But yeah, you're going to pay probably, I don't know, 20, 30 bucks maybe for them.
Yeah, it's not
just literally for them to print them. Yeah. And by the way, one of the other things I would mention here too is, how did you get a screenshot of that huge website? It's like, how does that happen? It must be some special key, to do that, of the whole page.
Yeah. So there's actually, there's a bunch of ways to do it, but we can go on that later.
All right. So, by the way, the link to this, where it says manuals, aviation, etc., that is in the handout for you guys. So if you download that PDF, you'll see that in there. All right, let's move on. Now,
hey, Chris, real quick, going back to the aircraft instructor's handbook, is there something about ground reference instructor in there? I'm sorry, not ground reference. Become a ground instructor.
Ground instructor. So this would be for both flight and ground instructors, because it is. Think of this as, like I said, this is teacher stuff in here. It's instructor stuff. So it's learning theory, the methods we use to teach, lesson planning, and so it's something that a ground instructor and a flight instructor would do. So yes, it does apply to both. So in order to get your flight instructor rating or your ground instructor rating, there's one test you have to pass, with one exception, which is the fundamentals of instruction test. You have to take a test that's on the actual knowledge for flight instructor or ground instructor, and then there's another one that's just on the learning stuff. It's called the fundamentals of instruction, often abbreviated as FOI, fundamentals of instruction. The only people that get exempted from that are people that are certified teachers. They don't have to do the FOI test, but this is still a good resource. And I have to tell you, like I said, I've got a lot of credits in education. This does a pretty good job of summarizing it all down, so it is a very useful handbook. They've done a good job with it. Okay, let's get to advisory circulars. So that we spent a lot of time on the manuals. If you thought there were a lot of manuals, the advisory circulars, there are so many more of them. It is amazing. In fact, some of the things that I thought were manuals are actually advisory circulars. I put those on the list here. There is a link in the handout that shows you the link how to get to the advisory circulars one, and it is broken down by the regulation area. So what do I mean by that? You probably are familiar with like Part 61, which is for pilot certification. Part 91 in 14 CFR is the rules that we fly by. If you're flying professionally, it's like 121 or 135, et cetera. They have advisory circulars broken down by those areas. So you can see here in the names of them. So like Part 00, which I'd have to go look up. I don't know that one off the top of my head. But 00-45H, it's advisory circular, that number is aviation weather services. So this is a document that explains all the weather products that are available to us and how to interpret them. So it's like if you're wondering how to read a radar, like the old textual radar reports, or area, well, of course, area forecasts are gone now, but like how to read a radar summary chart, that kind of stuff, or a prog chart. This thing explains all that stuff in excruciating detail. It does it, and it's like, and the weird part, it's written in like government format where it's like these bullet point things, so it makes it challenging, but it does. It's a great resource, the aviation weather services. There's another one that goes along the same area, aviation weather, which is all the theoretical stuff. So they do have that as an advisory circular. It's available. You just have to go and start digging. Like you can search by topic or search by reg, or reg area. 6198. This is what I wanted to point out. This is the guide for CFIs to use for doing flight reviews and other proficiency checks. It includes instrument proficiency checks or IPCs, stuff like that. It's got all the endorsements that they would give, but the part I thought that would be good for non-CFIs in here is if you're going to do a flight review or an instrument proficiency check, it actually has a guide. It has a sample plan for how the things that you would have to be asked about or do. And I thought that might be useful. You're wondering what's going to be on my flight review, and a lot of times you work with your CFI for that anyway, but you can go get these and take them with you and say, hey, look, this is a pretty good guide, and it has all the regs that you might want to study and review for. So I thought useful. Just it's in an appendix of that one, and it talks all about that.
So one of the things too, I was just going to say, when we're looking at these handbooks, it's basically the big, you know, based on our webinar, obviously don't get rusty, to look things up and, you know, have them as references. But secondly, as a student, right, this is where you're going to get a lot of your info for learning certain procedures, right, whether it be weather, or if you're going to look at some of the other manuals to find out how to do a steep turn and so on and so forth, and then to prepare for your check ride. But everything now, I think, at least for me, when you bring up air advisory circulars, I first think of airworthiness directives. And so, I mean, I don't know why, but I always do. But I mean, you know, things are categorized in so many ways, from air manufacturer, right? Piper specific ADs and blah, 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 blah. And there's so many other, literally it's almost like being on YouTube where you click on something and you end up at the ShamWow commercial when you started with, you know, cars. Right, circulars, directives, the regulations, handbooks, then all of a sudden you're going to end up probably in a NOTAM, you're going to end up looking at, you know, policies, and so it's like, oh my God, it's an enormous wealth of information. And I was going to say this for the end, but I think specifically for the student, don't get overwhelmed by any of this.
I agree.
I mean, you don't need technically any of it. It's a great reference and it's a great way to study for something, but your CFI is your primary contact here.
Yep.
You know, and then obviously the other stuff is all supplemental. So just had to add that.
I've got a slide coming up that's going to help with that for the students out there, because I agree with you. Don't get overwhelmed. I'm going to give you a guide, an FAA tip for doing that stuff. The other thing that I will mention are stuff like these textbooks that are commercially done as well, like Rod Machado's I like a lot, but Jeppesen, of course, ASA, all the other providers, they have, a lot of the times those textbooks will cover that stuff and they'll put it all together for you to help you get ready for the written test. So you don't get overwhelmed. The FAA stuff's nice because it's all free and there's tons of it. And that's all we're trying to do is just show you there's so much out there that you can do. But yeah, wait for that tip at the end. I'll give you a really good way that I learned during my training. Somebody finally pointed out to me like, oh, there's this thing you can look at from the FAA and it'll help you narrow all this down so you don't get overwhelmed, because there's so much. But we want to keep moving here, but one thing I wanted to point out was that there's an AC 90-66B. There's an entire thing that came out with on guidance on non-towered traffic patterns, because there's not a reg that says, there are some regs about flying in the pattern. Basically, for example, the reg says if you're flying at a non-towered field, you have to make left traffic unless it's designated to right traffic, right? That's kind of what the reg says. There are a couple other things like, right away and that sort of stuff, but they don't specify the exact maneuvers and things you're supposed to use in the pattern. That's stuff we see, for example, in this advisory circle. This is guidance on how they want us to do it, or it's also in the AIM and in the pilot's handbook. So for example, there's only one entry that is recommended by the FAA, right? So it's not, while Pablo definitely wants to make the point, it's not regulatory, but what they recommend is making a 45 entry to downwind. So the 45 entry to downwind is the only recommended way until this advisory circular came out, and then he gave one other option, which is this cross midfield pattern and enter the downwind. Go ahead.
It's really desired action.
Yes,
not recommended.
Action. Yes, desired action. Good way to talk. So there's also, they've added in, this is something they've been doing in Canada for a long time. They've added it in, if the pattern is not busy, it's not congested, is the way they talk about it. You could also make this flying at pattern altitude and enter directly to the downwind over the midfield crosswind entry, I think is the way they alternate midfield entry is the way they say it. So stuff like that here.
And I will say
this, guidance here about how to do this.
There's a lot of desired actions here by the FAA, and it's funny that there isn't a specific, right, like the way to do it. However, I think this is like Ford Chevy argument, right? Which one's better? It depends what you have. This always turns into an argument. We didn't want to do that, so please, I don't want the questions on it.
Yes. So the one thing I'll say is this is the recommended way, and the only thing I'll say as a CFI, that if we do the 45 entry, we're being predictable, and because we have people in the pattern that may not have a radio, they're flying a Piper Cub or something without a radio at a non-towered field, which is completely legal. They won't hear us making radio calls. So by being predictable coming on the 45, it's kind of being a way to be, I think, be courteous in a sense of, rather than doing some crazy other entry that you're coming up with. So anyway, one thing I want to mention too, that the reason I wanted to talk about advisory circulars is it's not just pilot stuff. In the advisory circulars, there's stuff for mechanics, air traffic controllers, all the other things, DPEs, the designated pilot examiners. So you can actually go and get a little glimpse into what they do. And a lot of times there's things in theirs that aren't in ours. So if you're ever wondering, like Pablo had that question about doing flight following with, like, why did one center want him to report altitude changes? The other one said, don't do that. You can go investigate that in their manual and find out what it is they're supposed to do. So it can be enlightening just to find out more about what are they told to do as well. It should all mesh with what we're told to do, but they'll have details that ours don't have. And so it's like, if you're ever curious about that, you want to know how they're supposed to do things, check out their manuals too. All that stuff's online for free as an advisory.
Yeah, and you know, the other thing too is, and this is kind of going away from this, but I'm trying to tie it back together. I am, because I think it's interesting. Is as soon as you said the radio call is, yes, it'd be interesting to see why they asked and why the other guy didn't, and to see what their rules say. But what also was helpful to actually listen to on ATC Live and to hear the actual calls to see exactly what was said, because maybe there's a misinterpretation. And I listened to mine and I was right. They gave me 2 separate ones. However, I was wrong on another one. And that's why I bring that up too, because you can see what happened. Because, you know, a lot of time the story, we're overwhelmed. And I told this a while ago, I was a student, I was completely overwhelmed. I had a terrible day and I just missed about 3 forward calls. They told me to line up and wait and I didn't do it. And then they yelled at me and I said, oh, they never said anything. I came home and listened to it and they told me to line up and wait. so that's why it's kind of like the way we remember it and the way it happened are sometimes 2 different things. And so we should go back and listen if you can. Not everybody can. You know, their calls weren't on there. But anyway, so that's fun to do too. And that's kind of a way to kind of tie it all together, in my opinion. When you see a regulation or something that happened to you and you can listen to it and see what they're supposed to do, and then just put it all together and say, here's what I did, here's what they did, what were they supposed to do?
Yeah, and yeah. By the way, we do have our legal services plan in this instance.
We do, actually.
Little plug for you. All right, here's my tip.
It's an add-on to your membership.
We were talking about don't get overwhelmed, and if you're looking for a guide on how to like figure out, sort of navigate all these resources, the Airman Certification Standards, or the ACS, or depending on what rating you might be doing, because there's still, the PTS is still out there for other ones like the Rec and Sport and so on. Whatever the appropriate one is for your pilot certificate, either that you're training for or that you hold, the ACS/PTS are both great resources for that. This is a sample from the ACS, and you can see right here it says engine starting. It gives you the things you would have to be able to do for the Checkride. But then right here under references, now they don't give you the names of them, but they give you the FAA numbers for them. And so 8083-2, 8083-3, and 8083-25. So these are handbooks. I don't have them memorized off the top of my head. There actually is a guide or a table in the ACS and the PTS that specify what these are. You can also look for them, but I can guarantee you that 2 of those, I don't remember the exact numbers, but one's the Airplane Flying Handbook, one is the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. I don't recall what the 3rd one is. And then, of course, it mentions looking at your POH and your Airplane Flight Manual / Airplane Flight Manual, the manual for the airplane. So,
and Chris,
really
just for those, sorry, the 25, 8083-25 is the Pilot's Handbook.
Yep. And I think -3 is probably the Airplane Flying Handbook, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't remember what -2 is.
Yeah. But I will say this, these are all also, when you use AFTA, the AOPA Flight Training Advantage program, these are all in the activity index and within your portals as well. Please continue.
Brought to you by AFTA. All right, so this is a really good way to do it. So check out the Airman Certification Standards. Not to mention, if you are actually going for a Checkride, I did not know this until I was doing my commercial. Like, I had been told as a private and during my instrument training, but the CFIs didn't do a good job of emphasizing what this document is. This literally is the guide to your Checkride. It's what the DPE is allowed to ask you, what topics can be covered. It's all in there. So check these out. And even after your Checkride, it's a resource too for just knowing and figuring out, like, well, where does it talk about that? This will tell you the places to go look. So check them out. All right, bonus. We have 2, actually just 2 bonus items on this slide as we get ready to get to the end here. Bonus. I wanted to point out that the FAA puts out 2 really good resources. One is the FAA Safety Magazine. It's called Safety Briefing Magazine. You can see here, it's literally, they put out an electronic magazine, and it has really cool articles about safety topics. One of my favorite ones, it's a few years old now, but they have a safety acronym for your passenger briefing. Safety stands for seatbelts. I think it's like air vents, fire extinguisher, exiting the aircraft, also for talking/traffic, and then the Y is for, do you have any questions? Why? So this is a great little acronym. I use it for when I'm giving a passenger briefing to somebody to make sure I cover all the required items. They have a whole article just on that. So there's one on the latest issue that I pulled this off the web, was FAA Practicing What We Preach. So kind of cool magazine. Check it out. You can actually get a subscription to it. They'll send it to you for free. The whole thing's free anyway, but they'll actually email it to you. And then the FAA Safety Team website, or the FAST team, it's at FAAsafety.gov. This is a great resource too, because it's got free courses that they put together. Sometimes they're from third-party providers, like I think a lot of AOPA's Air Safety Institute stuff's on there. But this is where you go to do your wings credit, right? That sort of stuff. And it's got courses that'll help fulfill that. But I often will use it just to, like, I love the one for the instrument proficiency prep. They've got a course on that that's really good. So free stuff available to you.
And someone just brought up too, Richard, online here, that it's actually a good pub.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's good reading. It's, yeah. I remember the first time I got it, I'm like, oh God.
It's interesting.
I read it. I always read it. Cover to cover is strong, obviously, but you know, there's an article or something you'll want to see, but there's good pictures, the writing's good, it's informational. You're like, and then I kind of look forward to it. I'm like, wait, where? I didn't get it this month or something. You know what I mean? It was like, oh.
Yeah, because the manuals and the ACs are very, like this AC, the advisory circulars are very governmenty, right? But they're informative. The manuals are written like textbooks, but these magazines are written like a magazine. So the FAA Safety Briefing is literally like a magazine. It's very easy to read and interesting. All right, I think that brings us to the end of our topics. I'm sure we may have some questions out there, but
we do.
Stephen, you want to tell us a little bit about the AOPA app and pilot passport and the code and everything before we get to questions?
Okay, so AOPA app is free to download. You log in with your normal AOPA credentials. And within the app, there is the Pilot Passport program. It ties into our airport directory, provides you information on airports that are nearby you, so you can research different things before you go. And they've gamified it a little bit where you can check in to the airports you visit. You earn points towards various badges, and every once in a while, our marketing folks will do some sweepstakes drawing. So it's definitely worth checking it out. We have a special badge for those who attend our presentations. You can put in the code; it gets you 1,000 points today.
And thank you, Stephen. And so obviously this is a good program in the sense of potentially getting some free stuff, having some fun. But we want to be clear: this is not Wings credit. So that code is not for Wings credit. To get Wings credit, Stephen, what do they have to do?
They have to do nothing. If you attended the presentation and you're here towards the end, I will collect the list of people attending. As long as the email you registered for the presentation matches the email you registered for your FAA Wings program, I will submit everyone's information to get you credit.
If I may interrupt, that was going to be my question, because someone has asked, is, you know, admittedly, as they said, the FAA website is extremely difficult to navigate at times.
It is. It's not intuitive. It is not
how
intuitive.
Do you know, can you tell us more intuitively how they can either find it with a link, or maybe a brief description as to how they would actually register for this webinar correctly to get proper Wings credit?
Sure. Stephen, you want that, or want me to take it?
Well, I do have a registration link that and registration
for Wings credit though.
Series.
Yeah, for Wings credit, all you have to do is you need an account on the FAAsafety.gov. I'll go back real quick to that one. This website right here, FAAsafety.gov. You create an account on there. That's how you do the Wings program. So whatever email you used to create your account there, and if you forget what it was, you can actually, I think they'll have some sort of thing like recover that stuff. Or if you have not created one, just go create a free account with FAAsafety.gov. That is the email that we then use. That's how they know if you get Wings credit or not. So when you register for Don't Get Rusty, use that same email address, and that's how you get credit. If by accident you used a different email to register for Don't Get Rusty, just message Stephen or send him an email. What do you prefer, Stephen, for getting those emails in case they messed up?
Email me at ftinitiative@aopa.org. I do wait a few business days before I pull the list, so I can go in and swap out the email you register with versus the one you have for the FAA registry. So just let me know there.
One more time on the email, please.
The FT, so Foxtrot Tango Initiative @aopa.org.
Maybe we can throw that in the chat as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, people were asking on here, so that's good. Now they're signed in. can you put the AOPA passport code in the chat as well, please?
There it is. That's a YCF
and
Web 091522.
There you go. Let's leave that there for a second while we talk about, of course, the next slide, which is what's coming up next. Don't change the slide yet. Leave that there.
I won't change the slide yet. Yes, but what's coming up next? Go ahead. We're gonna do it, Pablo.
A month from now, actually a little longer because of the way September worked out. October 20th, 2022, and for all of you that want to know when my birthday is, it's exactly 7 days later. So we will call this the Pablo birthday episode at 12 to 1 Eastern. More locally, of course.
My birthday episode thing, because mine's in September.
Well, I mean, not really, because we didn't plan for it. But thank you for asking. So 10 to 11 Mountain Time, which is more local, of course. And we will be talking about Ask an AME, getting wrenched.
No, not an AME. It's Ask an AMP. Should be. Did we fix that?
It says AME. Sorry.
Okay.
It says no.
Ask an AMP.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's on mine. Sorry. Yeah. All right. Let's go to the next slide so they can actually see it and write it down and keep track.
Oh, we didn't fix it. It's not Ask an AME. Ask an AMP. AMP.
Yeah. See, that's what happens when you just read the teleprompter. You get screwed.
Yeah.
All right, so there it is, guys. Plan for this one. It is more than a month out, but that's only because September reared its ugly head with it.
Let's clarify really quick. So Ask an AMP as an airframe and power plant mechanic. So it's Ask a Mechanic effectively, not an AME, which is an aviation medical examiner. So we're going to have a special guest, Jamie Beckett, on, who's one of our ambassadors. He was also an AMP. We've had him on before. We talked about, I know, electrical systems and some other stuff. And you guys had a bazillion questions for him, and he was able to field most of them, which is amazing. So we're going to have that. And I believe we're going to put out some, the poll out for that, right, Stephen, for generating questions ahead of time?
Correct, yes. I'll set up a forum for you to submit questions, and we'll try to work into the presentation.
Yeah, and we'll send that out on announcements for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's odd, but because it's my birthday, I might give something away. Come back. That's right. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. All right. So let's get to the good stuff now. Let's get to some Q&A, shall we? All right.
Oh, good.
Now, again, I read them as they came in. I'm not going to change them because this was the question that asked. Are there any guidelines on when a straight-in approach is no longer considered part of an arrival pattern? 1, 2, 5, 10, 15 miles, question mark. Longest I've heard of on CTAF is 15 miles straight and final. That's a strong final.
That's the whole point. So when it comes to FAA guidance, there is no guidance on that because they recommend doing a 45 to the downwind. They do not talk about doing straight in arrivals. So there is zero guidance for that. And that's why I would say, like, I flew professionally flew freight for about a year. And when I was doing that, even though freight pilots are like sort of, what's the word? I'm blanking on the word that I want to use, but it's like, even though it's like they would often be the ones that would just be like, oh, it's 10 miles straight in because I just wanted to waste time. I used to always do the 45 entry because I was trying to be courteous to the pilots in the pattern if they were there, as I flew a lot of non-towered fields doing that. So yeah, no guidance on that one, unfortunately. So instead, I'm just gonna throw it out there. I recommend do the 45 entry, be predictable to the pilots around you.
I will say this, this question did not specify towered or non-towered.
Yeah, so for towered, that's a whole different thing. And you're talking tower. And again, there's no FAA guidance for when it's like a part of an approach, but if tower says make a straight in, that's totally different. We're talking about non-towered fields for the other part. So yeah, then it would just be with like, I guess, I'm not going to put any rules in that, but it's just telling you what to do. And they're probably going to tell you to report so they can sequence you into traffic. Because we get straight ins all the time here at Frederick.
And that's what I was going to tell you is they gave us a straight in too when I was at DuPage, and at Centennial, I think I got a straight in before they changed me at the last second. But I think part of that is, the towered, non-towered, and a non-towered. I mean, you're obviously paying attention to people. If people are in the pattern doing stuff, you're not going to announce a 15-mile final. That's ridiculous. Now you're being rude. Okay, get in the pattern with everyone else. But on a towered airport, they don't give you a straight in from 15 miles out. What they'll tell you is plan for a straight in.
Right.
And then sometimes they'll change you right away or say, there's traffic, or they'll resequence you because the jet's coming in faster or what have you. So they are two very different things. But I think probably safety is your question.
I think they even say, like, I'm not trying to think this because I'm trying to go back in my memory now, but paying attention. I think they'll even say, like, they'll say make a straight in approach. They don't necessarily give you make a 15-mile straight in, but make a straight in,
Right.
and plan on whatever. And then, and then they'll tell you report 5 miles out or report 3 miles, that sort of stuff.
Yep. All right, so someone says, can't these be linked in the documents section of ForeFlight? So the question being, can these be linked into documents? You can't link them that I know of, but you can download.
Yeah, but the PDFs, and that's what I've done. I've taken some of the ones that I really like, and I'll put them in there so I have access. Because you can't, because most of the time, if you're in the airplane, especially if that's where I might want access to something, you're not going to have internet there typically. So you're going to want the PDF in there.
Yeah, and I will say, just as another caution, if you have a smaller 64 gig iPad or even a 128, if you use it a lot like I do, I've got a lot of stuff on there already. So, you know, if all I use it for is ForeFlight, cool, download them all, have fun. But remember, the iOS takes up a lot of space as well. So you don't have 64 gig of actual storage space. But, and this happened to me, I was going camping, I tried to download movies, and I could only do 3 episodes of something. And I was like, it's not working. I ran out of space because I have a 64 gig iPad. So just know these are enormous files. And even if you go to that link for the FAA with the list, and it gives you a PDF download, it'll tell you how big the whole thing is, and then it actually gives you the option for downloading chapters and or segments of chapters. So and usually they're super long because these books are 300-400 pages. So just be aware of that, right? Storage is key here, and we don't want to run out because the less storage we have, the slower things get.
One other tip I want to give for these things that I find useful, because, and I happen to use iPads, I'm sure this is the same for Android stuff as well, but I like to use an app, like I use iBooks, or there's another one called Goodreader that are PDF kind of managers, and it allows you to see things in chapters and that sort of stuff. So that's a cool way to use these as well, because having just a huge PDF file is not easy to navigate, because there are a lot of pages of these things. So it's nice to have the ones that have the table of contents with a chapter.
Yeah. All right, so there's that. All right, now this one is more so a rule thing, but I think it's split up into 2 segments. So I fly an LSA under sport pilot, but have a PPL. Am I legal to fly into Class C and D airspace with the appropriate communication and equipment? I think those are 2 separate questions, but what do you think, Chris?
So yeah, I want to check on the regs on that one, because I know that you have a private pilot, but you're operating under sport rules.
Yes, that's what I was saying.
Yeah. So it's like with sport rules, you are limited. I can't give you a definitive answer right off the top of my head like this, but I'll tell you what, that's a good one to give a call to 1-800-USA-AOPA to get that clarified, because they can have the time to look it up. I can try if I'm able to look at those, but I'd want to be more like confident about the answer on that one. But
I will clarify this. You just said 1-800-USA-AOPA can look it up for you. Actually, they don't even need to. I would guarantee you, and this is a good challenge for the person who asked this, and I'm sorry I didn't get your name, to call in. I'll bet you they know the answer off the top of their head.
I have no doubt that they do.
Yeah, they're that good. And it'd be fun to try, because it's fun. I mean, it's almost like people just call them to stump them. I love it.
It's hard to stump.
So this one, again, I didn't know whether I should ask or not, but I'm going to, because I thought it was a good question, not so much related to regs, but curious to y'all thoughts regarding a syllabus. My flight school did not use one, thus I never knew what to read ahead of time. And I think AFTA is the reason I'm reading this. Whether handbook, airplane, flying handbook, etc., at least for me, a syllabus would have helped me prepare. So me personally, if you didn't have something to prepare, there's obviously resources, and we just went over several of them. There's 1,000 more on the internet. But I think in this case, it comes down to you're the student and you should have a CFI. You should be able to ask the instructor to put down something, some guidance. There's got to be something from that instructor. And hopefully, hopefully it was a matter of maybe you just didn't ask, but because I don't want to think that you asked and they had no guidance. That would be a bad instructor. There's no other way to say that. So, and I don't know, Chris. Yeah. Well, what do you think on this?
So, number one, I absolutely am a huge proponent of some organized instruction. I particularly like the syllabus. Obviously, we are slightly biased when it comes to AFTA. We think that's a great product to use, but a syllabus nonetheless. You need to know ahead of time. You are wasting your money, and if a CFI for some reason won't tell you that, and I had one that did this to me, And I was a school teacher, so it's like I was kind of going like, why aren't you telling me these things? And I changed CFIs. So if you have a CFI that will not tell you how to prepare for the next flight, change CFIs, because that is ridiculous. If you look at the aviation instructor's handbook, it clearly says you need to be providing organized instruction, whether you're running it like a 141 program with a very strict syllabus or just some sort of guidance. But you've got to know how to prepare ahead of time. Otherwise, you are wasting your money and time. So don't do that. Don't fall for that. Don't put up with it.
And I will say this, if for whatever reason, maybe you live in an area that you just can't go somewhere else, right? That's possible. You're a little more remote or something. I use the books, and I specifically was Airplane Flying Handbook and the Pilot's Handbook, because they taught me both about the things I needed to know, like weather and airspace, and how to do a steep turn stall and stuff like that to prepare for it. Now, granted, you said you didn't know how to prepare ahead of time. You can still read certain things as to what you're doing, right? You just did land-ins, they were okay. You did, again, all your stalls, and they were all right. You didn't know what to expect. I would read about that to be prepared for the next lesson. I know it's stupid, but at least to be prepared so that I can do it better, because most likely it didn't work out well. We're probably going to do it again. So that's how I would handle that.
Maybe a positive way of doing it too, because it's like I said, don't put up with it. If you do like the things and try to be proactive, and if they're not using one and you're saying like, hey, can we do this? And they just refuse to, that's why if there's an option, move, go to somebody else. But what you might want to do is, if they don't have something they typically use, get them, take a look at AFTA, the AOPA Flight Training Advantage, or find it like there's Rob Machado puts a syllabus out. I know Sporties does it. I know Jeff, you can Google these things and find them. Yeah, so you can Google them, and they find one that would work, and then use that as your guide. But then ask your CFI like, hey, I'd like to use this because I want a plan. You shouldn't have to be doing that, but if you do, try to be proactive and get them doing it. Like I said, if they just refuse to do it, that's time to find a different CFI.
Yeah, and and you mentioned Sporties, and when we do mention vendors or third-party people, we're not mentioning to plug them. They're examples because I've used them, maybe Chris has used them, whoever has used them to success, and so that's what we can speak on, right? I'm not going to talk about the Garmin products. I've never used them. So in this case, Sporties, I did use these Sporties private pilot course. I bought it and I did all that. And I had a similar issue. It wasn't as bad, but there were a lot of times where it was like, what are we doing today? It's like, I don't know. That doesn't help, which didn't help for the next lesson, because then you'd say, what are we doing next time? We'll figure it out, So sometimes you got that, sometimes. But with the Sporties, for example, there's a flow to what they're teaching you. And so you can kind of follow it along, and hopefully it intersects with what you're doing. If nothing else, you've learned something ahead of time. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I think we beat that one to death. Let's continue.
That's one
question. Oh, no, that's for us. Sorry, my bad. Okay. As I understand, you can fly under your private pilot, so someone's answering, in a light sport if the LSA manufacturer's list of approved operations include the PPL operations that you want to conduct. Response?
That one, like I said, I don't know enough about that off the top of my head to answer that with any sort of authority. But that's where 100 USA AOPA, those guys have that down. I was trying to look up the regular. I was trying to listen as well about that.
Okay. Well, surprisingly, I get a lot more questions. Those are the ones I had written down. A lot of passport questions, a lot of naval aviation stuff. Like, okay. So they're giving me what the current one is, and it's at sea. Oh, it's too long to give. We can put that in something at the end. But I mean, that's pretty much it in terms of questions. Handouts, I think maybe we should just summarize a lot of stuff we're talking about here, because that's it for questions.
Yeah, and the handout is there. So if you, for some reason you can't find it, I'm sure we could if you email us, we can send it to you. But check on the thing right there, that little download.
The email there is obviously ftinitiative, like Steven said earlier, at aopa.org. And you can reach us there, and we will get you, well, basically anything from this episode. And obviously, we can answer anything about previous episodes, future episodes, and more importantly, if you have ideas for new episodes, send those in too.
Yes, please. Oh, and I think Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong too. When you get this posted to YouTube, we include the handout or a link to the handout. Is that correct?
I do indeed. There will be a link in the description of the episode that will lead you to a place you can download the handouts and information.
There you go. So it'll be there too in a few days. It'll take us probably till this weekend or Monday for that to be posted on YouTube.
Yeah, it depends on our media team how quick they can get it uploaded.
And we've got a K, looks like Sundrum is the way I'd say it, saying great job,
Hey,
gentlemen.
Kay.
So we appreciate cross-pollination between areas, which just so you know, sorry, I don't want to plug, but they do the every other Tuesday, they do a Ask an Ambassador. Not as well recognized, of course, but you know, still maybe second, we'll call it on the AOPA list. So thanks, Kay. All right, so that's it. I think this is one of the few times we finished early. So if you do have questions, please send them in. We can always cover them in other episodes, or even we've talked about creating an episode of all of the questions that we haven't been able to ask or answer, because we literally probably have hundreds of them. And so that might be a show as well. So send in anything you got. And Chris, you can't play us out. We tried testing it earlier and you can't hear it, but he would have. So I'll say it anyway. Chris, play us out.
Noise canceling microphones. I don't know about.
You said you'd sing, so sing while Stephen.
What I said I sing. I didn't say that. What are you talking about?
All right, Stephen, put us
All
away
right.
until next one. Thanks, buddy.
Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.